Welcome to English Through Stories. I'm Justin. Do you sometimes find past tense verbs difficult when you speak? You're in the right place. Each story here will give you natural repetition of useful vocabulary and grammar so you can begin using it more confidently. Today's story is about a father and his journey back home to his family. It will give you focus on everyday past tense verbs in action. Let's begin.
Chapter 1. The Village by the River. The village was beside a long, calm river. Boats came in the mornings and left each night. People carried bags on their backs, counted coins, and stacked baskets. The air smelled of bread from ovens and pine wood from the forest. Children ran around and would then stop to watch the passing boats. A bell rang when a new boat would come to the village dock. John Hale lived in a narrow house close to the dock. He woke early. He swept the house entrance area. He checked the bucket by the door, filled it with water, then set it back in place. He often helped other people before he worked on his own house. He carried grain for the miller. He repaired a broken net for the fishermen. He stood at the corner to hold a ladder while a neighbor repaired a window. He liked to help. It made his face relax. It made his hands feel useful. But his own fence was broken, and his own roof boards needed repair. Marta, his wife, noticed. She folded shirts. She scrubbed the table. She spoke to John in a low voice when he paused near the door. "You help everyone," she said, "but you leave our work for later." John set his hands on the table and nodded. "I will fix the fence after the market," he said. He meant it. Then the bell rang at the dock, and he walked outside to see the new boat. Ella, their daughter, went to the meeting most days. She wrote names in a large record book. She counted small payments for storage. She tied a string around a package of paper. She read old notices to men who did not read. She liked neat lines, clear numbers, and straight columns. At noon, she closed the book, ate bread and an apple, and then returned to the table to continue. The market square grew busy by mid-morning. Two craftsmen from upriver laid a cloth on a low table. They set out wooden bowls, smooth toys, and a small wooden horse. A woman from a baking stall cut warm loaves and passed slices in exchange for apples. An iron worker hammered a strip of metal on a block. Sparks jumped. John held the iron worker's tongs while the man took a heavier tool. "Thank you," the man said. John smiled and stepped back. A group of river traders arrived with bead strings, dried fish, and soft leather. They spoke a language John did not know, then switched to simple words he understood. They asked for needles and salt. They offered corn and baskets. A young trader pointed at the small wooden horse on the craftsman's table and laughed softly. He showed John a tiny mark on the belly of the horse, a maker's sign. He tapped his own chest as if to say, "I remember this sign." John touched the little horse and felt the smooth curve of its back. By late afternoon, the square settled. Dust hung above the road. A dog slept under a bench. Ella walked home with a thin stack of papers. She pushed open the door. Marta stirred a pot. John came in behind her with a bag of flour. They ate quietly. The river moved beyond the window, steady as breath. Before sleep, John stood by the door and looked at the tools he had leaned against the wall. He would fix the fence tomorrow. He believed that again. Chapter 2. Work, Errands, and a Promise. The next day began with the bell and the smell of smoke. John lifted the hammer and a small box of nails. He walked to the fence and checked each post. He tapped one nail. Then a neighbor called his name. A cartwheel had slipped from a pin. John went to look. He set the wheel on a block, slid the pin back, and tied a strip of leather to hold it tight. The neighbor pressed a small coin into John's hand. John shook his head. The neighbor insisted. John smiled and put the coin in his pocket. When he walked back to the fence, another voice called. The miller needed help with bags. John went to the mill. At midday, Ella stood in the meeting house and books and gave papers to a woman from the far farm. Ella showed her where to sign. The woman held the pen like a knife. Ella placed her hand over the woman's hand and guided the pen. A slow, careful name formed on the line. "Thank you," the woman said. Ella nodded and stamped the page. On the way home, Ella met a group of children on the square. They kicked a rag ball. One boy shouted and ran after it. A girl slipped on loose dirt and scraped her knee. Ella cleaned the cut with water from her cup and tied a cloth around it. The girl's mother came and thanked her. "We need a room for reading," Ella said to the woman, "so children can learn letters." The woman said, "Yes, a small room with a bench." Ella thought about that as she walked on. At the dock, an older man argued with a boatman about a lost package of cloth. The older man spoke too fast. The boatman lifted both hands and shook his head. John stepped between them and asked for calm. He asked simple questions. Who carried the package from the boat? When? Where did the man set it? The boatman pointed to a corner by a post. John searched the area and found the package behind a barrel. It had slipped off a crate. He returned it. The men thanked him, first with loud voices, then with smiles. Near the iron workers' stall, the craftsmen from upriver cleaned their table. The small wooden horse still sat in the center. John asked the price. It was not much, but he did not have coins left after flour and nails. He held the horse in his hand for a moment, then set it down. The older craftsman watched him and said, "You can make one." He made a shape with his fingers, as if he carved wood in the air. John nodded. "I can try." That evening, John found a short piece of river oak behind the house. He tested it with his knife. The wood cut clean. He went inside and told Ella, "I will make a wooden horse for you. It will stand straight. It will carry our story." Ella smiled. "I will keep it safe," she said. Marta looked up from the table. "Fix the fence first," she said. John sat down with his food and looked at the hammer by the door. "I will fix it first thing in the morning," he said. Chapter 3. The Wooden Horse. The morning brought thin clouds and a pale sky. John stepped outside with the hammer and nails. He set a post upright and hit 2 nails. The fence felt firm again. He began the second post. Then a call came from the dock. A boat arrived early with wet bags of grain. The bags needed to move before the rain. John went to help. He lifted the bags and set them in the store. He wiped his hands on his shirt. He looked back toward the fence, then walked home. He set the wood and the knife on the ground. He sat, moved the knife along the edge, and made the first small cut. The blade moved softly. A piece of wood fell to the ground. Ella came to the door and watched. John shaped a head, a neck, and a strong back. He worked slowly, then paused to carry a bucket for a neighbor. He returned and smoothed one side of the horse. He returned and cut the legs to the same length. Ash, the dog, came and sat near John's foot. He laid his head on John's shoe. The sun rose higher and warmed the ground. Marta stepped out with a cup of water and looked at the fence. She looked at him and said nothing. John understood. He set down the horse and went to the fence again. He hit 4 nails and tested the rail. His job there was done. He returned to working on the horse's tail and making a perfect curve. By afternoon, the horse looked recognizable. The body felt smooth. The legs stood with perfect balance. John rubbed the surface with a piece of cloth to make it even smoother. He cut a tiny line for the mouth. He used a hot needle to make 2 small eyes. Ella sat beside him and held the tail with gentle fingers. "It looks proud," she said. John nodded. "It will never get tired," he said. A trader from the next village passed the house and waved. He stopped to see the horse. He smiled and took a red thread from his bag. He held it out. John thanked him, tied the thread around the horse's neck, and made a simple knot. "For luck," the trader said, and tapped his chest. When it started to get dark outside, John stood up, stretched his back, and placed the wooden horse in Ella's hands. "Keep it near you," he said. "If I walk into the hills, I will come back to see it." Ella held the horse to her chest and smiled. "I will keep it on the shelf by my bed," she said. That night, she set it there and looked at it before she closed her eyes. In the next room, John and Marta spoke in low voices. Marta wished for steady work at their own house. John promised again. He believed his own words. He went to sleep with that promise like a small stone in his pocket. Chapter 4. The Hills and the Quiet Game. Morning rain passed, and the sky cleared. John finished the last 2 nails in the fence. The rail felt steady now. He ate a small piece of bread and cheese. He filled a bottle with water. He told Ella he would walk into the hills for a short time to bring back dry wood. "I will return before dark," he said. Ella touched the wooden horse and said, "I will wait and watch the road." John called to Ash. The dog stood and wagged his tail so hard it made a small sound against the door. John laughed and patted him. They set out on the path behind the house. The ground felt soft with dry leaves under their boots. The air smelled of old forest. They passed the last house of the street and moved into taller trees. Birds shifted on branches. A squirrel froze, then jumped. John stepped over tree branches and walked around stones. They crossed a small stream. John drank and splashed his face. Ash drank and shook his coat, sending drops in a circle. John climbed a low slope and paused to breathe. A hawk circled near a cliff. Its cry echoed across the rock. John watched the curve of the bird and then looked down at the river far below. The village sat like small blocks near the water. He thought of the fence, the hammer, and the new nails. He thought of the wooden horse by Ella's bed. The path split near a large rock. One way followed the ridge. One way fell into a deep place between 2 hills. John chose the ridge because the light stayed longer there. On the ridge, the wind moved his shirt. He walked until he saw a narrow deer track that bent toward a ledge. He followed it, then stopped when he saw a figure across a gap. The figure stood with a load on his back. The shape looked like a man. The man moved slowly, step by step, as if each step weighed as much as a chair. John called a greeting. The man did not answer. Ash gave a low sound deep in his throat. The man stepped into a brighter patch of light. John saw a round wooden container on the man's back. The hoops looked dark. The man raised a hand and pointed toward a higher slope. He seemed to ask for help. John walked to meet him. He took one side of the container. The man nodded once. Together, they carried it along a narrow path. The path curved between green rocks with soft plants. The ground felt damp. The air felt cooler. After a short climb, the path opened into an empty space with high stone walls. The tops of the walls wore a ring of leaves like a low crown. Several men stood around a long, flat log. On the ground lay stones shaped like balls and 9 short posts. One man rolled a stone. It struck the posts with a dull sound. The sound rolled around the stone, then faded. No one spoke. No one laughed. Their faces looked careful and still. The man with the round wooden container touched the top of it. John opened it and saw clear liquid. He handed cups, and each man took a cup, drank, and set it down without a word. John tasted a small sip. Warmth spread in his chest. He sat on a stone and watched the balls roll. His eyes grew heavy. He leaned back against the wall. He meant to rest for a short time. He slept. Chapter 5. The stone pool and the long walk home. John woke up to the sound of birds. Sunlight touched his face. He sat up slowly with pain in his neck. He looked for the empty space with the log and the balls. It was gone. He lay on a grassy place near the path. Ash was not there, so he called the dog's name. Only leaves moved. He stood and checked his gun. The wood had small cracks and the metal had spots. The strap had broken and looked older than yesterday. He walked to the place where the path to the empty space had stood. A small stream now ran there. Water slid over dark stones and made a soft sound. He followed the stream up the slope. The bushes caught his sleeves. He pushed through and reached a high wall of rock with a small waterfall. The water fell into a deep, dark pool. Mist rose and cooled his face. He called for Ash again, and he whistled the way he always whistled before a meal. Birds made a sound in reply. He sat on a wet log and looked at the water. The place felt familiar and strange at the same time. He could not explain it, and he felt a small fear in his stomach. He stood again and looked at the sky as the sun had moved. He felt extremely hungry, but his bread was gone. He turned toward the path that led down to the river and walked slowly. He stopped often to listen. Once he thought he heard a splash behind him, but when he turned, there was only the stream. He reached the ridge, then followed it to the lower trail. The river showed as a silver line. He took a deep breath and kept walking. Near the first houses, he saw new fences, a new roof, and a new well cover. Children played a game with sticks and an old ball. They stared at his coat and at his beard. A dog barked once and ran away. John felt uncomfortable. He walked to his street and looked for his house. A larger house stood there now. It had a painted door and 2 steps instead of 1. A man locked the door and smiled at John as he passed. John watched him go and did not speak. He went to the meeting house, but the sign had fresh paint and looked new. Inside, the air smelled of paper and chemicals. A thin man wrote in a large record book. He did not look up at first. John waited. The man raised his head. "Yes?" he asked. John asked for names he knew: Mr. Klein, the miller, the craftsman with the smooth bowls. The man narrowed his eyes. He named other men in their place and said, "Many years later, people changed. New families came. Old ones moved or passed away." He turned a few pages. He pointed to a list and a short note. "John Hale," the man read aloud, "helper at the dock, husband to Marta, father to Ella." Below that note, another hand had written a line: "Not seen again after a walk in the hills. The man touched the page. "This note is very old," he said. John stood still and felt the room move. He thanked the man and stepped outside. The flag at the square moved in a steady wind. The river looked and trees looked the same, but the faces did not. He went to the corner and sat on a house entrance step. He set his hands on his knees and closed his eyes. The sound of the river gave him comfort. Chapter 6. The New Routines. John stood up and decided to walk the streets and ask simple questions. He stopped a baker and asked about Marta. The baker said, "She died many years ago?" He pointed to the far road. Ella lived near the east gate. John thanked him and walked on. At the market, women set containers in a row and counted eggs. 2 boys carried water from the well, and a man weighed grain on a scale. John helped an old woman lift a basket. She smiled and told him he was kind, like a man she had known long ago. He asked her the man's name. She said, "John Hale." He smiled back and said nothing else. He went to the iron worker. A younger man now held the hammer. He shaped a small hook while a boy adjusted the fire. John watched the quick, confident hands. He remembered how he had used those tools before. The iron worker looked up. "Do you need something repaired?" he asked. John shook his head. "Not today," he said. He walked to the place where the craftsmen often arranged their table. A new table stood there, with painted toys and wooden spoons. A woman sold thread and buttons. John asked if anyone remembered a small wooden horse with a red thread around its neck. The woman tilted her head. "I saw one in the meetin' house," she said. "It was in a box with old things from families long ago. You can ask inside." John went back to the meeting house and books. He asked to see the box of family things. The thin man nodded to a shelf. "You may look," he said. John lifted a wooden box and set it on the table. Inside lay a child's shoe, a broken pipe, 2 hats, and a small wooden horse with a red thread tied at the neck. John touched it with his finger. He felt every line he had cut. His breath caught. He picked it up. The surface showed a dark surface color, smooth from many hands. He set it down again and wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Where did this come from?" John asked. The man looked in the record book. He looked carefully at the list. "It came from Ella Grant," he said. "She brought it when she moved to the farm near the east gate. She said her father made it. She called it a treasure. She asked us to keep it safe when she traveled." John nodded and took a deep breath while holding the table to keep his balance. He asked for the path to the east gate, and the man pointed the way. John left the meeting house and walked the road. He passed a woman who was just outside her house. He then lifted 2 heavy buckets for a boy who struggled and stopped once to tie his shoe and look at the river. He spoke a quiet word to himself. Home. Chapter 7. Ella's House. The east gate stood near a small group of new houses. A fence of straight boards ran along the road. A black hen was eating from the ground. John stopped at a house with 2 windows and a short path to the door. He knocked. A woman opened the door and was holding a little girl on her hip. The woman had dark hair like Marta's, but her smile looked like Ella's smile when she was small. John said her name softly. "Ella?" The woman's eyes narrowed. She looked at his face and then at his hands. She looked at the road behind him. "Yes," she said, "I am Ella." John swallowed. He tried to speak and could not. He tried again. "It is me," he said, "your father." She shook her head and almost laughed. My father went for a walk in the hills when I was a girl, she said. He did not come home. John lowered his head. I slept, he said. I do not know how long. I woke up many years later. He looked at the child who hid her face in Ella's shoulder. A man stepped into the doorway behind Ella. He had wide shoulders and calm eyes. He looked at John and then at Ella. Who is this? He asked. Ella dijo. Él dice que es mi padre. The man studied John's face. He did not speak for a long moment. He stepped back and opened the door. Come inside, he said. The room smelled of soup and warm bread. A small table stood near the window. A chair had a patch on one leg and a coat hung from a nail by the door. Ella set the child on a stool and gave her a wooden spoon to hold. John looked at the shelves. On the top shelf sat a small wooden horse with a red thread. He lifted a hand but did not touch it. I carved that, he said. Ella turned. She took the horse down and set it in his hands. I kept it, she said. I called it our treasure. I brought it to the meeting house when we moved, so it would stay safe. I took it home again last year. John turned the horse and felt the legs with his thumb. He could feel small lines where the knife had cut the wood. He wiped his eyes again and smiled. It kept its promise, he said. He sat down at the table. Ella set a bowl in front of him. The man poured water and set the cup near John's hand. I am Grant, he said. Ella's husband. John nodded. Thank you, he said. They ate. They did not talk much at first. The spoon made soft sounds against the bowl. The child hit her spoon on the table and then laughed at the sound. After a time, Grant asked simple questions. Where did John live before? What did he do each day? John answered and spoke about the dock, the market, the ironworker, the craftsman's table, the meeting house. He spoke about helping too much and fixing too little at home. He spoke about the walk in the hills and the empty space with the log and the stones. He spoke about the round wooden container and the silent men. He spoke about sleep and waking. Ella listened. Grant listened too. When John finished, Ella touched the wooden horse. I kept it near my bed for years, she said. When I felt afraid, I held it. I felt strong. I told myself you would come back. After some years, I stopped saying it, but I kept the horse. She looked at John with wet eyes. You came back, she said. John nodded. I came back, he said. Chapter 8. What Stayed. John moved into a small room in Ella's house. He woke early and cleaned the house. He carried water and repaired a strap on a bucket. He fixed a loose board on the hen house. He helped in small ways every day by keeping his hands busy and his words simple. He walked to the meeting house with Ella on market days and carried the record book when it felt heavy. He held the child on his knee and told her short stories from the dock and the mill. He showed her how to count 3 nails and then count them again to be sure. He taught her to make a knot that stayed strong. He also walked to his old street. He stood where his house used to be. He watched people he did not know walk in and out of the new house and felt sadness like a stone, but also a lightness like air. He could not hold on to either feeling for very long. He turned and walked back to Ella's house. On a cool morning, he went to the iron worker and asked for a small favor. The young iron worker brought a thin nail with a round head. John carried it home and took the small wooden horse and tied a fresh red thread at the neck. He set the nail in the wall near the table and hung the horse on it. He stepped back and looked at it. The horse stood confidently. Its surface color looked soft in the light. Grant came in and stood beside him. "It looks perfect there," Grant said. John agreed. Ella began a small book reading group on 2 afternoons each week. She set a bench in the meeting house and brought 3 writing boards and a box of chalk. Children came, some shy, some excited. John sat in the back and listened to the soft scratch of chalk. He kept a small cup of water and a cloth ready to clean the writing boards. He carried the record book for Ella when she needed both hands for a child's arm. On one market day, a man shouted about a lost bag. People turned and searched under tables and around baskets. John asked calm questions. "Where did you stand? Which path did you take?" He walked that path and found the bag near a post where a rope had caught it and pulled it to the ground. He gave it back, and the man tried to press coins into John's hand. John shook his head. The man insisted, and John smiled and took one coin and placed it in the box for chalk at the reading circle. On another day, a storm damaged a roof near the square. Fire burned the boards. People formed a line with buckets, and John stood in the middle as he lifted each bucket high to the next hand. The line moved fast, and the fire finally died as the roof smoked. People coughed and then laughed with relief. Ella found John and touched his shoulder. "You are strong," she said. He smiled and said, "Many hands are strong." As seasons changed, John kept the same simple habits. He walked with the child to the edge of the river and showed her how to make a flat stone skip across the water. He counted the skips out loud. He took her hand when she jumped from a low entrance step. He told her a story about a little horse that carried a family's memory. He said the horse did not eat or drink, but it contained a promise. The child asked, "What promise?" John said, "To come back and see it." The child smiled and said, "You came back."
Well done. You've just completed your first past tense story. This method of repeating grammar patterns will help you speak more fluently and confidently. Continue with the next story to get even more practice.